In 1981, our first guest infiltrated the experimental laboratories of the Institute for Behavioral Research. What he found was a living hell. Research animals were being held prisoner in most inhumane conditions. He decided to take action, filming the cages, taking notes, and already he has made quite a difference. As he'll explain to us, he's the founder and head of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. He's Alex PACHECO. Did we get it right that time?
Yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Alex, it's good to see you. Sorry about saying it wrong there before.
That's quite all right.
So tell us what you found out. And first of all, tell us about the Institute for Behavioral Research, exactly what that is.
Well, it's just a private research institution. There are about well over 1,000 laboratories in the country that are almost completely funded with our tax dollars. And the one I worked in for a period was just one of the private facilities. And it turns out that about 500,000 of our tax dollars are spent every hour doing live animal experiments, paying for the experiments. And about 7,000 animals are killed in experiments every hour of the day. And the problem is that most of the people in the public are under the impression that these experiments just involve, for example, little white mice, and that they're just being injected with needles and things like that. But the ugly fact of the matter is that what we're talking about are things such as taking two dogs and cutting off both their heads and sewing the heads onto the bodies of other animals, doing head transplants, dipping live animals into boiling water. I have a film of a full-grown pig who is tied down to the floor and is being blowtorched all the way down to the muscle. The laboratory I worked in, well, there's a lot of money in it. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And it's very ingrained into the research establishment. It's been going on for hundreds of years.
Something like $4 billion a year?
Yes, $4 billion of our tax dollars. And the one thing that the public should know is that out of the $500,000 that are spent every hour on these experiments, we, the public, have absolutely no say-so in what kind of experiments are done and whether or not painkillers are ever given to the animals. We're taxed and the money is spent on mutilating these animals in the laboratories, but we have no say-so whatsoever. Lay people are not allowed to have any say-so in the peer review panels who give out the money to the experiments.
So with your photos and your film and your notes, what did you do with all that and where did it go?
Well, there's very little that... in this particular case, we were able to have the experimenter arrested and convicted of cruelty to the animals. But it was a very unique case because in most states, animal experimenters are completely exempt from the cruelty laws. They don't have to obey any of the laws that you and I have to obey. They can do literally anything in the world to an animal, and as long as it's done inside a laboratory, then it's legal. It's not classified as cruelty. But in Maryland, where this laboratory was located, actually the experiment itself is still exempt. He could still have done anything he wanted to the animals, and he did. He was sewing their eyelids shut when they were 1 day old. He was scrambling sections of their brains, and he was cutting nerves at the spine. He was surgically crippling them. These are monkeys that he was doing it to. By the way, he's a psychologist.
There's a picture of one there.
That's one of the monkeys. And so we were only able to charge him with mistreating the animals outside the experiment. We were in the court cases that followed. We were never allowed to discuss what happened during the experiments. That's off limits.
Now, what I'm having a little confusion is exactly why they perform the experiment. I mean, why do you perform head transplants on dogs? I mean, what do you gain or what do you prove from that?
Well, that's another misconception that most of the people in this country have, is that most people would think that, well, to do these ghastly things, you've got to have a good reason, right? Well, there are two types of research that are done. One is called basic or pure research, and the other is applied. Applied research is when you have a problem and you're trying to solve a particular problem. Basic research or pure research is research just done for the sake of gaining knowledge. And that's what this was. It was basic research, where experimenters are free to do whatever they want in the name of obtaining, in the name of science, and for the sake of obtaining knowledge. And when you approach them and you say, well, don't you think this is a little useless and wasteful? The common response is, well, that's not for us to decide, that is for future generations to decide. whether or not information is going to be useful.
Did you say there were 1,000 laboratories in the country like this?
Well over 1,000, yes.
Yeah. So have you gone into other ones now since you've taken care of the one in Maryland?
Yes, for example, at the moment we're working on one where the federal government, again with our money, our tax dollars, is building a rifle range. The rifle range is going to be used only for shooting live animals. The live animals will be tied down and shot in various places in the body. And then medical students will watch as the animals are patched up. And then they'll be doing, again, basic research on wounds. It's called a wound laboratory. And this was first done with animals in a laboratory before 1894. And they've been shooting animals in laboratories ever since then. And again, it's where they're able to get grants from one another. It's a very in-house system.
What do you say to the people that tell you, well, we need to do these shooting experiments because it helps us in treating, humans and their wounds?
Well, you can respond on the ethical grounds or on the scientific grounds. And for example, scientifically, we've got a whole list of combat surgeons, medics who have been active in Vietnam, who are right now signing petitions saying that this is completely needless. So, and then on the ethical side, we have, there are lots of people who get shot every day in this country, and the emergency rooms have lots of people that can be studied. Just how to treat wounds, how to treat gunshot wounds, and that most of the doctors, the surgeons we've been in touch with say there's no need to be going around creating more victims at taxpayers' expense especially.
We have enough around already.
We've got enough people that get shot and killed every day in this country.
You have a celebrity fundraiser coming up.
That's scheduled for June 12th. So by the time this show airs, it may have already
Well, what is the purpose
passed.
of it anyway?
Oh, it's to raise money for two cases, because one is this rifle range, and the other case is where the laboratory that I worked in, where these animals had all been surgically crippled, and the psychologist was convicted. He is still trying to get the animals back and to finish his experiment by crippling their only good arm. So they've got two crippled arms, and then he'll sacrifice all of them to finish his experiment. But the second case involves, we're trying to change the status of animals in the courts, in the law, because in the courts, animals are just considered like property and things. They're considered just like you'd consider a chair or a typewriter. And you can't defend an animal in the courts unless you own the animal. So if someone, for example, in this laboratory, in this case, the psychologist, he is the owner of the animals. Even though our tax dollars paid for it, he legally owns them now. But we're having a very difficult time allowing the court to allow us to try to protect the animals in the courts. So we're trying to get the courts to consider these animals as abused children, because that's really what they are. They're not things, but they should be, the court should appoint a third party to represent the abused children, because the abuser, the parents, or the owner, isn't protecting the animals.
Well, where do the laboratories get the animals?
Excuse me, there are two sources. One from shelters and dog pounds where people turn in their animals, or animals that are unclaimed or unadopted, animals that run loose and are lost and are caught by the dog catcher. Those animals are then funneled into laboratories. For example, the rifle range will be using only, for training the students, they'll only be using dogs that are former pets and that wound up in dog pounds. And then they buy specially bred animals. It's a billion-dollar industry just breeding animals for the laboratories. And they breed all kinds of severe, deformed animals, animals that are born blind, animals that are born anemic, with all kinds of diseases. They're just born with those things.
Well, thank you for coming by and seeing us, Alex.
Well, thanks for
continued
having
success.
Us
Okay.
Appreciate it.
We're going to be back on our next show with the beautiful Kathleen Turner from the film The Man with Two Brains, one of TV's top producers, Leonard Goldberg. We're also going to talk to the author of a book that tells you how to pursue an acting career and how to go about it the best way. And we're also going to meet Linda Leilani Brown from Dreamgirls, and Dr. James Sternberg tells us how to have beautiful skin at any age. So we hope you'll join us. See you then.